This is Reuters. I'm Jen Rogers. The U.S. budget deficit is worse than you think. That's according to Reuters columnist James Pethokoukis, who says the current budget projections are too rosy and don't take a lot of factors into account. He joins us right now from the Reuters Bureau in Washington, D.C. So, James, I mean, this isn't that much to write home about. It's not all wine and roses. Is it really that much worse?
Listen, it's not as bad as what their original estimate was a while back. That's because they decided they're not going to need another $250 billion to help out the banks through TARP. So from the short-term perspective, it's actually a little bit better. But I think in a longer-term perspective, the numbers are far worse. A lot of these White House estimates are really based on certain assumptions about where taxes are going, where spending is going, which probably aren't very realistic. But that's sort of where the current law is. But future laws probably likely be remarkably different. Take, for example, the alternative minimum tax, which right now is grabbing more and more taxpayers at a lower and lower income. Assuming that needs to be fixed for one, just one difference right there. So I think what you're likely to see, I think the Congressional Budget Office, who also put out their deficit estimates today, they said that instead of, if you look at the debt as a percentage of the whole economy, as a percentage of GDP, where the White House said it's probably going to be about 4%. Versus 11% now, 4% by the end of this 10-year period. It actually could end up being like 8 or 8.5% of GDP, which would be huge. It would be like the biggest number really since World War II, other than the current financial crisis. And then once you take into account that these numbers don't even include all these liabilities from Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, when you tack that on, you're talking some really huge numbers. In fact, if you calculate the deficit the way most companies would, the budget deficit this year, instead of being over $1 trillion, $1.5 trillion, would be closer to $6 or $7 trillion. So really, we still don't have a very good handle, I don't think, on what our true budget deficit really is.
I mean, are you leading me to believe that the White House is trying to put a good spin on this? It seems like this is just business as usual in Washington, right?
Yes, and business as usual is putting as positive a spin numbers as possible.
So they're doing a good job.
That's it. So it is business as usual. I think that what the public needs is to fully understand exactly how bad our debt situation is. And I think these sorts of numbers end up, while there may be some use in them in showing how the numbers are changing from year to year, as far as getting a much broader perspective on where we stand, I think these numbers today are fairly useless when you don't take into account, again, that we have these huge outstanding liabilities that right now we're doing nothing about.
To take the administration's side for a second, though, they're probably sitting there saying, well, we can't predict the future of exactly what's going to happen with AMT. We have no idea what's going to be happening with these big entitlement programs. So this is the best that we can do at this point. You still feel that it's useless, the best that they can do?
Well, I think it doesn't take a tremendous amount of clairvoyance to look at some actuarial numbers to see where Social Security is going, to see where Medicare is going. Listen, let's say if you're off by 25%, if you're off by 50%, you're still talking tens of trillions of dollars that we really can't afford unless we cut spending fairly sharply or raise taxes fairly sharply. So I really don't think it's a huge stretch to begin to incorporate this sort of a broader perspective on what our future tax liability really is.
And do you think that the government should be held to the same standard as corporations are when trying to figure out their numbers?
Well, I don't think that would be a bad idea, because what you want to give, I think, voters and politicians and policymakers is a fairly accurate view of what our long-term commitments are really at. Listen, I can give you just a very quick example. Remember that we had that great period of budget surpluses in the earlier part of this decade and the last part of the 90s, where over a course of about 4 years, we generated about $600 billion in budget surpluses. But the only reason they were that big is because we used the Social Security surpluses to cover the deficit. If you took out the Social Security money, which is meant for Social Security, instead of running a $600 billion budget surplus from about, I think, 98 to about 2002, we only ran about a $20 billion budget surplus. Now, compared to these numbers, that sounds pretty good. But even back then, people were not getting the true numbers and didn't have a really, I think, a very accurate view of what our budget situation was really like.
Lies, damn lies, statistics, budgets, deficits. Our thanks to Reuters columnist James Pethokoukis for joining us from Washington, D.C. Bureau to walk us through all of this. This is Reuters. I'm Jen Rogers.